Hi everyone, welcome back to Play in the System, the first episode of 2021. I'm here in my home studio, decided to shoot the camera out looking onto the forest to give you an idea of the inspiration behind today's episode, which is all about the release of the new Snow Palms album. I'm absolutely delighted to share this with you. It's been a huge amount of work. You know my love of all things physical, of of vinyl and of tapes and even CDs. And the smell of the lacquer. I love like fonts on it. I love the album. Not just this album, but I love albums. I love vinyl. I love the size. I just think it's just such a wonderful experience to hold music in this way. So I'd firstly like to say a massive thank you to everyone who contributed to this record, all the friends of support, Alex and Richie, Infidel's crew. I'd like to thank Megan, who did an incredible job working on this record whilst firstly very, very, very pregnant, and then through the birth of our son and through multiple lockdowns where she just managed to deliver such inspirational vocals in the shortest timescales known to man. So massive respect, Megan, you are amazing. I'd like to thank Mark Kirby, the big man behind Village Green, for providing this immense platform for artists to make great work. And it happened that my favourite record of last year, other than Paul Nataraj, who is taking over Playing the System today, Max de Wardener's immense music for detuned pianos was my favourite record of last year, and that just feels such a privilege to be on the same label that is releasing your favourite music. So Mark, thank you, big respect. I'd like to thank Simon Gogoli for doing some additional mixing where I lost my mind and couldn't carry on. He did an amazing job. I'd like to thank Ruben Astley and Scott Gubbins for some additional production work, just bits and bobs. You wouldn't have thought it, but you're a massive help. I'd like to thank the incredible Sam Williams, producer, who did a wonderful job in the early days, bearing with mine and David's total madness. I'd like to thank Frank Stein, you're a legend. I would like to thank Nick Frank for the incredible artwork that you do. I've never met you, Nick, but your work adorns most of our releases. So yeah, you're a total legend. I'd like to thank Richard Robinson, who put it all together design-wise, and I'd like to also thank the whole Village Green team, Tessa. I'd like to thank John Rust. I'd like to thank David Roger, who did an incredible job working with us in the studio. And mostly, I'd like to thank you for being here, for giving me energy to play in the system, for giving me energy to make music. And yeah, this episode is dedicated to you. Thank you so much. So, what do we talk about in this episode? Well, it's a Snow Palm special, so we talk about the making of the records. We also touch on, and I've made quite an exhaustive list here on my phone so don't forget, we talk about Paul's record, the incredible Cobblestones and Kitchari. Inevitably, On Some Faraway Beach comes up because David Sheppard is the author, so we talk about Brian Eno. We talk about some of the methodologies behind making the record, and a particularly important one was a demonstration I saw at Ableton Loop. I love Ableton, I love Ableton Loop. And it was Bugge Wesseltoft and Henrik Schwarz. And they use a particular improvisation technique on Ableton, which I think should be called the Wesseltoft method, or the Wesseltoft methodology. So yeah, we talk about that. Obviously we talk about some oblique strategies. I don't think there's a day goes by without talking about a bit of that. There is obviously some Philip Glass, there's a bit of The Fall, there's some Steve Reich. I love Susan Ciani, so I always talk about Susan Ciani's modular synthesis. There's some Max Easley, some William Basinski, some Italio Calvini, some Robert McFarlane, and of course some Suicide. Not that kind, the incredible band Suicide. So it's jam-packed full of stuff. It's also accompanied by a lot of music. Thank you for being here. There is one disclaimer, it's not episode 6, it's episode 4. I got a bit carried away, but I thought I'd leave it in anyway because, you know, I'm a bit dyslexic, I'm a bit numb and dyslexic, I'm a bit light on details. There you go. It's wicked to have you here. Enjoy playing the system, episode 4. I hope you love it. Thank you, Paul, for hosting it, and I'll see you all soon. Hi everyone, welcome to Play in the System, episode 6. This is a Snow Palms special. I'm incredibly excited to welcome both David Sheppard back onto the show and Paul Nataraj back onto the show, whose album Cobblestones and Kitchari is quite possibly my favourite record of the year. And by the looking of it, David too, they are now sold out. So even if you want to buy this wonderful cassette, you can't, but you can listen to it on Bandcamp, and it's fantastic. So Paul is here to essentially chat to us about our new record, which has come out today. So here it is. I've put it up in the background. It's called Land Waves. It's out on vinyl, and go to Bandcamp where you can buy the wonderful vinyl. You can buy a CD if you're that way inclined, or you can just stream it. So I'm going to hand over to Paul, who is our guest host for today. And I'm struggling to talk and put this behind me. Can't do two things at the same time. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to talk to us about our record and celebrate the release. Thank you very much, Paul.
No, thank you very much. I mean, it's such an auspicious day. What an amazing honour it is to be able to chat with you about the record, and for you to have asked me to do that. I feel very honoured indeed. Thank you so much for the big ups on my thing as well. That's amazing. But yeah, what an outstanding record. We'll get to it in a couple of minutes, and what we're going to do is kind of talk through each track. But for those people who kind of don't know, which I'm sure there's not many of those listening, but what is kind of the story of Snow Palms up until this point? So how did you guys get together, and what's the vibes? Where did Snow Palms start?
It starts with me. And it starts in 2012. And the story begins when somebody asked me to make a library record, using a lot of mallet instruments, which I already used on some other projects. And I started making this thing, and it kind of started developing into something that I didn't really want to do a library record anymore. I thought this is quite interesting, and the idea came from putting together two disparate things. One which was kind of music made with mallets, and then something that was contrasting with that, and that's the idea of Snow Palms. This idea of complete kind of opposites in a way. So the original plan was to do kind of like chamber music, and on top of kind of mallet music that sounded vaguely electronic. And one of the things that underlines or sort of hallmarks what Snow Palms is, and I think it's even more so now Matt is on board, is this idea of electronic music that sounds organic and human music that sounds electronic. And somehow these things, there's like a weird Venn diagram thing goes on. So that was the plan. And so I made two records as Snow Palms, essentially as me. I had a couple of collaborators on that. A guy called Chris Leary, who records as Oka, also worked on those records, but it was mostly me. And then I met Matt. Because we were both teaching in the same place, teaching music stuff. And we just got on really well, and we had very similar kind of tastes in music, and certainly kind of goals in music, where we want to go with music. And he comes from a very different background to me, but we kind of seem to be going in the same direction. And so, to cut a very long story short, we tried working together to do a record for Matt, and it kind of evolved into this sounds like Snow Palms. You're in Snow Palms now. So I kind of took him hostage. So that wasn't that short, was it? But anyway, it's quite a long story, but there you go.
No, that's really cool. And so when you started getting involved, Matt, how did you approach it, and kind of what was your thought process? How did you feel about collaborating with David, and what happened there? What was the energy?
Yes, it's fascinating. I'd just come out of Infidels, which was a 10-year crazy electro-punk journey around the world. And I'd always loved rock and roll. And my dad's been a massive influence on my musical taste, who is a real lover of the strange. So he loves like our Hooli records, and at school was working on a project with me on Alan Lomax, and I can't believe, looking back on it now, how lucky I was to have a dad into Alan Lomax and talking to me about Mississippi field recordings and playing me this crazy music. And this was very much kind of in my blood, I suppose, because I'd been brought up on it. And so I loved rock and roll and the history of all of that. But I also loved minimalism. And one of my first ever loves of that was Tubular Bells as a young kid, hearing that kind of repetitive, cyclic music. And anyway, Infidels was a project that I was involved with that really exploded and totally took over my life and my brain. And it it kind of derailed me, like I think all big things do. It sort of flung me aside. And at 33, I was absolutely smashed to pieces. But I really credit Brian Eno with saving me, because what I learned from Brian Eno was that rock and roll is almost a church. It's we kind of reify rock and roll styles, or certainly did. I don't think we necessarily do anymore. But Brian Eno taught me to look at it like a system. And he got me excited about systems music. And I turned up, I did a master's in education to try and refine who I was, and got a job teaching at Westminster University. And I was tasked with teaching a module with David Sheppard on creativity. So I turned up for day one of work, and on week 2, I said, are you the same David Sheppard that's written the Brian Eno biography on my shelf? And he was like, oh yeah, that's me. I was like, oh, what are the chances of that? It was just blow my mind. And I decided I was out of music. I quit. I was done with it. I'd sold loads of my stuff. I couldn't cope with it. But a couple of years later, I started to try again. I bought a studio, hired a studio every week, and I'd go there on a Monday in Bermondsey at the Biscuit Factory. And I thought, well, I'm going to invite David down on day one. Well, day one, I just sat in it. I couldn't actually make any music. I'd so lost my sense of, I don't know what I'd lost. Everything, something, my mind. So day one, I just sat in the empty space and made no music at all. So then week 2, I said, David, please will you come to the studio with me? I need some vibes, man, And David is just such a wonderful creative, because he almost came with no predisposed idea of what the outcome was going to be. And we just got lost in this process that I can only really call the Wesseltoft method. So there's a Ableton jam with Bugge Wesseltoft and Henrik Schwarz. and they're using Ableton as this live improvisational tool. And we just started to do that, playing instruments. And I think we're going to do a talk on this as well, but it seemed to me where we were used to sound on sound, we were now experiencing sound and sound. So we didn't need to anymore lay a track and then stop and record another track and another track. We could do all of this in real time because the technology allowed this for the first time I've ever experienced. And over time, we kept doing this and thoroughly enjoying ourselves. And we presented the record to Mark Kirby from Village Green, which he loved. And he just said, well, why don't you just join Snow Palms for album 3? And the fruits of all of this labour, which began in 2015, are now released today for the first time. So it's been 5 years, really.
Wow, that is amazing and really interesting in terms of how that process developed from kind of through Ableton and kind of going back to this idea that David talked about, which really comes through in the record, which is kind of this really interesting tension between electronics and live, and how that shifts and modulates. But so just before we talk about the record, I just wanted to talk as well about the idea of repetition and evolution, because obviously the record's kind of got harks to Steve Reich and Philip Glass and Eno and Kraftwerk and all that kind of that minimalist stuff. Kind of really reminds me of J.G. Ballard as well. It kind of feels like a J.G. Ballard kind of story.
That's amazing, because David, tell Paul what we almost called the new band if it was going to be a band.
Well, we were going to call it Terminal Beach, which is or the Terminal Beach, which is a J.G. Ballard short story. That was definitely in there. Some of that, and it's even there on the cover actually of this record. I think it's quite Ballardian.
Yeah, definitely so.
Which we didn't do on purpose. It's kind of like a long story, which I won't go into now, how we ended up with that cover. But it's kind of it's in the DNA.
Yeah, well, it sings through. So can you just talk to me a bit about repetition and your take on repetition, what that means to you, and kind of that? Well,
I always get it from one of Eno's Oblique strategies, which is a repetition is a form of change, and The Fall. We dig repetition, B-side of the first single, and we dig repetition. It's a great kind of anthem to minimalism in a way. But side issue. I think I'm with Philip Glass in the sense that that music that he make, and I'd like to think, I hope it's not too much of a leap to think that we make too. It doesn't actually repeat. It's not repeating. It's evolving, but it's sometimes evolving very very microscopically or slowly anyway, and over time it's the idea of actually repeat. I think the music that repeats is like house music or something like that, or that music we were talking about before we started. I was mentioning deep house, deep rural house, new genre, watch out for it. But this music doesn't actually repeat. It sort of evolves very slowly in a kind of cellular way, that small things are happening every bar, something is happening just about. But it's that we talk about the Matt will laugh, but we talk about the dissolve reveal process. So it's quite filmic. The sense of most music is jump cuts. Most music goes from this bit to that bit to this bit to that bit. Oh, we're in the chorus. Oh, we're back to the bridge. That kind of way. And personally, I've kind of somehow, whether I like this or whether it's the only thing I can do, I don't know. But my default is always to move gradually to the next stage, and then from there to the next stage, and then to the next stage. So it's dissolve reveal. That's always what we do. Whenever we get stuck on a piece of music that we can't kind of progress it, we always just try to dissolve reveal, and it nearly always works. You just fade one part out and fade another one up. That's all it is. There's no secret to it. But it kind of, if you do it properly, it kind of has it gives you long momentum, which is why some of our tracks are quite long. It's almost like they can't be any shorter, because you have to have that period of time to actually achieve the transition. So it's all about that. So those are my feelings about it. I don't know, Matt's going to say something completely different now.
Well, I think it's just going slightly back to my story post Infidels, I also left London at that time. And for me, electronic music had always been connected to industry, city, urban areas. And I'd really felt the electronic nature of the graffiti on the walls and the lights of the city. So when I moved into Ashdown Forest, I had at the same time I was having this kind of emotional breakdown or wig out or whatever it was called. I couldn't understand how I was predominantly an electronic musician in a forest, and what relationship does electronic music that I know have to this. I look out my studio window and it's just forest everywhere. How does that relate to machine-made music? And it was through nature that I found the way into electronic music again, which is through, my daughter goes to a Montessori school, so she studies sacred geometry and fractals and looking at the patterns of the trees and how everything shimmers in the forest. And then you suddenly realise that we are surrounded by this incredible form of repetition, but it's also a form of change where the repetition is not exactly the same each time. And I became obsessed with how do I capture that in music, which links so wonderfully with minimalism, because they too, there was the New York minimalists, but there was also the West Coast, almost more spiritual minimalists, looking at it all, from a very different prism. I've forgotten what's the name, the Tape Center, San Francisco Tape Center, Don Buchla, Suzanne Ciani, and that seemed to really, Terry Riley, have that. It was so natural. And that unlocked the door. And then from that, I then bought my first modular system because that facilitates that repetition as a form of change. And on a forum yesterday, we were all talking about, if you could summarize in a sentence, what are you trying to do with the modular system? It was incredibly difficult to answer, actually. And I had to do some research to answer the question, and found a Max Easley quote, which I slightly bastardized, I don't know, into improvisation as compositional process. So the modular system does jump cuts so badly. If you try and do verse chorus on a modular system, it takes a colossal amount of knowledge, and it's borderline impossible. What it does fantastically well is slow evolving patterns with chance and random processes. So I found I learnt the modular system, and we found in Snow Palms that I've always been interested in that machine-human relationship and the transference between machines to humans to machines to humans. So we started to use the modular as genesis and then score the modular parts for other instruments. So yeah, that's, I suppose, my journey towards repetition and back to it. But interestingly, with the Infidels, a lot of the backing tracks originally were written in this way, and then they became cut into verse choruses with vocals put over. But I know Richie, who is in the band, hears Snow Palms, and it for him very much sounds like early Infidels instrumentals. So it was kind of, for me, always there, but it's just brought out in different ways.
Really, really interesting. I think there's a little segue there for me, which is kind of this idea of the fractal nature of things and the shimmering nature of complexity of evolution, the evolving sound, into the title of your first track on the record, which is Atom Dance. And there seems to be some kind of linkage there, maybe tangential, I don't know. So the record's called Land Waves. The first track is Atom Dance. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that track? Where did that come from? What's the story of Atom Dance?
Well, it starts with Matt and his little boy.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. it's interesting. It was near the end of the process. So we look at the album in 3 pillars. Everything Ascending, Land Waves and Atom Dance. They're the Roman pillars holding the ceiling of the album up. And we always thought very conceptually like this, that we wanted these 3 huge pieces of work on the record. And Atom Dance was the final pillar that we created. And Everything Ascending was the first. So when we wrote Everything Ascending, my wife was heavily pregnant with our son, and she was doing all the vocals, had to sit down. I think she was weeks away from giving birth. And there's something wonderful in the way that recording can be like a Polaroid. It can just capture a moment. But then by the time we got to Atom Dance, he was 2. So he was kind of whizzing around the studio, and by this point I feel like I was sort of level 2 modular out of 10 as opposed to level 1. It's such a complex thing to learn, but I'd actually started to get it to do things that I wanted it to do. It obviously did a lot of things that I didn't want it to do, which is, I think, the beauty of a modular. It's like interacting with a musician. But the pattern that begins Atom Dance is from the IntelliGel Metropolis sequencer, which is a wonderful techno machine, but I was looking at it like a minimalist machine because you can so easily click in and out mutes. So you can start to reveal patterns. And this is something I learned from studying Caterina Barbieri's work, who does that brilliantly. She lets the patterns emerge over time. And I thought, I really want to do something like that. So yeah, I created the pattern that was the beginning of Atom Dance. And it was like a thundering kind of electronic piece, and presented it to David. And I said, I think this is Snow Palms. And he was like, okay, cool. Well, put it on some real instruments and see what it sounds like. So I kind of mapped it out in this very quick pitch. And that was incredibly fast. I think it was only about an hour's work originally. Mapped it out to glockenspiels and clarinets. And then David came in as the great arranger. And I really see David's so good at arranging, editing, mapping, conceptualizing. So he took it from this very maximal piece, which was everything always, to a few things sometimes. So yeah, I suppose probably good to hear your take on hearing that first demo, David.
Yeah, it was like seeing an enormous piece of marble, beautiful marble, and seeing that an outline of a sculpture had been made, an outline of a sculpture had been made in it, but it was still too monolithic to actually appreciate. It was too big. So it was like chipping away some of the marble to reveal something that you could actually then kind of appreciate the beauty of it, sort of. Because it was in there. I don't know how much of it was luck and how much of it was thought in a way. I think probably a mixture of both. But it suddenly seemed to present itself as like something that could be arranged rather than just a kind of sonic event, which often those modular-based things are. They're kind of these beautiful events. But we found a lot of luck or success, if that's the right word, with the modular, where something's really quite minimal to begin with, and sort of saying, stop there. Let's not try and develop it anymore. Let's just use that as a template to build on before we get into the world of, what I like about modular. I think what Matt likes about modular, at least partly, is that, and what most people don't do with it is that it can be just one part of a picture, rather than just, it always has to be the only tool you're using. So most modular people just do music with modular, don't think about it, other instruments. Whereas for me, it was like, well, this is just like a fertile gate opener, and it's setting a template down. You can build with that any way you like. And to me, it reminded me of the process that we'd first begun with when we were just like doing our kind of jazz odysseys in Ableton, which was really it's just an improvisational tool, isn't it? That's the way we were using it. And so it's that electronic and human conversation, just in a slightly different language, But so that's how I saw it. I mean, I just thought I could see this amazing thing in this monolith of music that Matt had created, and so it's just a matter of he creates the mountain, and I just like chip away at the mountain really until something forms.
And I've always been a real fan of music in parts. I love the Philip Glass music in 12 parts. and he's got two with music with changing parts. I love this idea, but I've always often thought about 2-part music. I love records that have a part A, which is most of it, and then something totally new comes in. It just always rocks me, and it's something we did a lot in the Infidels with the big tracks, Can't Get Enough, and Explain Nothing into 503, and I really wanted to do that again with these tracks, with Land Waves, Everything Ascending, and Atom Dance. So we had part A, which was turned out, as we stretched it turned into this sort of 8-minute long piece, and we were really looking for, I was thinking, it can go further, let's get a part B. And that was just pure fluke. There was this melody line that seemed so common. I'm nowhere near the musician enough to write a line like that. I don't know what it's, some bonkers time signature that the clarinets player told me it was in 15, 16 or something, I don't know. But it just emerged, didn't it? And we sort of chased it into the woods. We're like, there's a melody, what is it? And that's the one that emerges towards the end. And then Megan, who did such a wonderful job on this whole album, we all had the kids around as well, so it was a bit like, was it cluster experience in the country? But the kids brought an urgency to it all, where we just couldn't rest on our laurels and take our time. So the vocals were all dropped in so quickly, and Megan arrived, and I think she, the average time was probably like 11 minutes we had Megan for, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 21 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, so short periods of time because of the lockdown situation and everything that was going on in the world. And she just sang that melody line, and David suggested that she use the solfeggio. And so we tried to work it out. I'm sure we got it wrong with the various implementer. Yeah.
But I think we in the end we went for what sounded like kind of a language rather than actually just using the strict solfege. But
and then when that came on, it just exploded, and I just got chills all down my body. It was just something connected at that moment, and I knew out of the hundreds and hundreds of tracks we'd made that were rubbish, this one was special.
Super. That's a beautiful answer. Thanks, guys. Honestly. So it's interesting. I was saying to Matt before we started that when I was listening to it, the first two words that I wrote down were quiet urgency, and it's kind of got this. There's an underlying really powerful energy about the record, but it also kind of just allows you to be. Which is really interesting in terms of what you were saying about the way in which, especially the human elements, and I'm talking specifically about the vocals, were put down. I think that's quite interesting. And you were talking about the birth of your son as well, happening around that time. So
yeah,
really interesting. So you move on then to Everything Is Ascending, which is just an unbelievable piece of music. Really, really stunning. So what's the story there? And I suppose so this record's taken you 5 years of work, is that right? So well,
probably if you crunched all the days together, probably not more than 6 months, because it was made in kind of like isolated, some of it was very isolated, and then we had more intense periods, but we started working together I think in 2015 or 16.
Yeah.
So that kind of the space between those sessions, let's say, how does that affect how this record's come about? Because a lot of the time, if you're working on something, it's kind of quite intense. You're in that zone and you're just knocking away at it, and you're in that headspace. So kind of leaving it and then coming back to it. Do you think that that's changed the outcomes at all? And if so, how do you think that?
I think it has quite a big impact. So I think it gives you time to reflect, and reflection is quite important, I think. And probably, I'm a big note taker in the studio. I fill notebooks with ideas. And Matt is much more of a kind of impulsive and dynamic person than I am. And I think this is how we work, and that's the when you're talking about that kind of quiet urgency, that's sort of us, isn't it, in a way. But I think, going away and thinking about designing the record, I think what we need is this. But we both have that. We just apply it in slightly different ways. We both have that thing of what the record, we thought about these pillars, we thought about what do we need in between, what's the kind of energy that we haven't explored yet, things like that. And that all comes from stepping back, at least a little bit, I think, and looking at it from a distance. So I think that was quite important. But I mean, Everything Ascending was the first track. That took a lot of work because that was our door opening track actually. When we went from, we did a remix for somebody on Village Green, a guy called Matt Dunkley, a film composer, and for a record store day EP that the label put out. So we did a remix of his orchestral piece, but we completely reinvented it basically, and that kind of, by doing that, we arrived at a methodology, I think, which we then have applied ever since to some degree. Although it was quite a hard thing to find at the beginning, because I think we were still on the tail end of the Ableton kind of explorations, and then finding this kind of analog meets electronic signature. So anyway, long story short, Everything Ascending was where we put the pieces together. The woodwind, the winds, the voice, Megan's voice, the mallets, the electronics. So the proportions of those were kind of worked out with Everything Ascending. And also what Matt was talking about earlier, the idea of a part B and a part C thing, that it could be a journey, take you on a bit of a cliche, but take you somewhere, move you somewhere, transcend, go. It's not just a piece of music for background. It's a more immersive kind of thing than that somehow, and it's definitely transportative, if that's a word. So that's quite an important track, I think, for setting us going, and that was the one that was released as a single a long time ago, because the album was supposed to come out a long time ago before the COVID interruption. Yeah, that was the launch. And I remember saying to you, quoting that Leonard Cohen line, there's a crack in everything. That's where the light comes in. That was absolutely that moment of like, okay, it's like, you know, God is in the house kind of thing. So this is what you need to do now, you know. So it was great. It was a great moment. But we were completely knackered by the end of doing that track. Remember that.
It feels like a track where, you know, and Matt's saying it really, that kind of you tend to get lost in it, you know, and it is transcendent in that way, and you need to get lost in it. So, and I just had a question about when you're working together, how easy or difficult is it to get lost together? Because you're kind of within this musical space, which is losing, which is where you go to get lost, and that seems to be a personal thing. But so how do you kind of how do two of you get lost in that space? That's the question. It's difficult.
It's a good question. I think there's a certain amount of music making, and you know this, Paul, just as well as anybody, that's mechanical. You know, that you actually have to put paint on the canvas before you can do anything. You know, you can start to form an image. You know, so there's always that element of the kind of, and then do that, and then do that, and then do that, and kind of methodically build up something. But then that's why the reflection point is so important, I think, because you do have to step back and go, what have we made? You know, and how can we, if it's starting to sound predictable, what can we do to it to make it surprise us? And what I love about working with Matt is that he responds, his kind of surprise gene is the same as mine. So when he kind of goes, oh man, and I'm also going, oh man, and that's great, because then you just know, you know you're working towards the same goal. And there are times when we've started making something and let's just listen to that again. We're not doing anything. We're just sort of listening like a couple of teenagers, kind of go, this is cool, you know. And that's a lovely feeling. You know, it's a nice thing to share. And that gives you the enthusiasm then to, you know, try not to break it as you develop it further. You know, let's remember what it sounded like when we first heard it. And that's something to always sort of bear in mind as you keep building.
We're very much, we're kind of, unbelievably, because both of us talk so much, the studio process, what I like about it is it's quite sort of tape rolling, really. We sort of just set something up to record and got quite lost in process and sound, and don't really do a right lot of talking, I don't think, in that process, and we just let things be. And having that comfort to improvise with people is quite rare, I think, because I've often felt pressured for results. You start working with someone and they're like, well, go on then. And you're just like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what to do. But when you're looking...
sorry to interrupt, but you just reminded me of a brilliant thing that Eno, when I interviewed Eno, told me this thing. He has this thing where when he starts a track, because he never knows where he's going, doesn't compose in any kind of orthodox way, in pretty much the same way we don't. He says he often starts with a drum machine and a piano going donk, 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 because he just wants to put something down. And he says he's never got over the imposter syndrome of feeling like a complete fraud, where all these kind of technical people are around, kind of, is this it? Is this what you do? Is this Brian Eno? And I think I think everyone has that bit. It's like it's quite nice to be that naked at a certain point as well, just to go, I wonder what this is going to turn into. You know, I like that's the magic. You know, I love that. Kind of.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Any interruption that starts with, that reminds me of when I was talking to Brian Eno. It's worthy of an interruption. But I think ultimately, to summarise it, I got really into, and David will know, and you probably will as well, Paul, who said this, because I can't quite remember whether it was John Cage, but the idea of, instead of being a god of composition in the sort of Wagner sense of controlling everything, being a gardener that plants seeds and letting them grow. Who is it that said that?
Probably Cage. Sounds like Cage.
Sounds Cage, yeah. And that forms really the basis, I think, of our approach to things. And I've looked for a long time to avoid any of my own tropes, you know, the kind of licks you might play on the guitar, or every instrument comes with its own sort of set of tropes, doesn't it, of things it likes you to do. And we look to try and do the opposite.
That's why I play the mallets, because I don't know how to play them. You know, I can play the guitar really well. I mean, I'm quite a good drummer, but we don't do any of that. Max,
there's
really
no
good.
guitar. Yeah. I'm a guitarist as well. We don't play the guitar in the band.
All our studios are full of these lovely guitars. We never touch them. There's no guitars on the record. You know.
There's one, a diddly bow.
There's a diddly bow. Yeah.
There's one diddly bow, which is a guitar with essentially the beginning of electric guitar, which is a bit of wood, a pickup, and a string. No frets, no nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no. So yeah, it's like that thing of not having chops. You know, is great, because anytime you achieve anything that kind of has an emotional kind of effect on you by playing an instrument that you don't know what you're doing, it's somehow really profound, and you kind of cherish it and use it in a perhaps a more creative way than you would if you kind of, I know what to do now, I'm just going to do an inverted chord here, you know, and then you just repeat something that's kind of predictable.
I think that's what I love about your record so much, Paul, is that, you know, there's no chops, there's none of that stuff in it. It's just very pure in a way.
Well, thank you. I'm going to leave that where it is, but thanks. Yeah, I think you're right a bit, and I think that probably comes from not being a player, but also doing things like we were talking about before, being a bit isolated, and enjoying that isolation, because actually it's kind of nice to do things on your own terms. You know?
Yeah.
So moving on to track 3 is Evening Rain Gardens, which is quite choral. Orchestral. So what's the story there? Is there a gardens, and was it raining?
Yes. It's actually, all it is it's the end of Everything Ascending that we cut off. So it actually sort of joins on the record. It's like a prospect. So really it's a coda, it's another part of that track, but it kind of seemed to occupy space. And when it existed on the I can't remember, Matt may remember, when we were building it on the screen, we just called it the Japanese garden bit. That's just kind of what it got called. And so that's sort of where that came from. And I think at some point when we were finishing, it was raining. I think it was it was that profound. They kind of got the name. But that's another one which is really came together because we'd had lots of work on it, and then Megan came in for 10 minutes, did the vocals literally, I think in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then went away again, and suddenly we had this kind of like kaleidoscope piece that we didn't have before. Before it was just a kind of ambient drift that was kind of like coda, taking us out of that big heavy track, like a kind of sorbet course, after the blowout, and but then it turned into something much more kind of like shimmering and magical because of her voice just like painted on top of it.
I wanted a sort of hybrid of William Basinski and Juliana Barwick kind of feel, a sort of.
I know we were listening to Juliana Barwick that day. I remember.
Yeah, we were. And
we said to her, "Can you do something Barwickian?"
Yeah.
And we remember pissing ourselves saying the word Barwickian.
And I'd seen William Basinski in Berlin, and it just blew me away. The stillness, the way he stood there in a really dark room with one light on him and full sequined suit. so Basinski, and the light fracturing off this sequin suit, and I don't know whether it was planned or not, but it was absolutely magical. And then the utter shock of being in conversation with William Basinski for an hour, and what a different kind of person he was to what I imagined. He's such a rock star. He's like the ambient Iggy Pop, so loud and boisterous and incredible personality, and his music is so calm and still. So Evening Rain Gardens to me was a bit of a homage to that Basinski experience I'd had. Nice.
Brilliant. And that's really, really lovely. And then the title track, Land Waves. Waves of what? What's the story there? Is it sound waves across the land? I mean, it was, or again, this kind of human movement into complexity, moving from certain urban spaces to rural spaces? What's the kind of thinking?
I like all of those. That'll do. They're all good. Actually, I remember I had the title written down in a notebook, and it was, I think I'd seen a photograph. There's somewhere, I think it's in Western Australia. There are these rock formations that look like, quite literally, look like the sea. They're just kind of they're really weird. I think it's somewhere in Western Australia, and they might even be called the land waves. I think I might have just stolen it wholesale, actually. But I love that idea of, again, it's the sort of the solidity of electronics and the fluidity of organic action, or if you want to call it that. Something again, it's the whole Snow Palms duality thing. That to me seems to say quite a lot. It seems, it's also that feeling when it's something I've done on some of my other records, is that feeling of when you're kind of at one with being a human, is often when you're the most daunted as a physical presence. It's that idea you have if you've ever been kind of suddenly find yourself, you do a long hike in the mountains or something like that, and you suddenly look around and there's no one else around, and you see the cloud passing across the mountain, and you think, oh my God, I'm just another tiny speck of this enormous great vista that's going on. And it's something, and I love that feeling, because it's like that's the true meaning of awesome, that feeling, the awesomeness of the planet that we live on, and the tininess of ourselves as these little kind of flickering presences amongst this monolithic world. It's something about that, and I think hopefully the music has at least the tiniest quality of that in it, and then I would be happy if people could detect that. But that's certainly the notionally where that came. I did a solo record 5 years ago, and it was called Vertical Land, and I'd been doing a lot of traveling in mountainous places. I'd been to Norway, and I'd been to the volcanic Greek islands, and I'd been to Southern Africa, all in that year. God, those days seem like a long time ago. And I just was finding myself in all of these places. I'm writing in my notebook, here I am again, and I'm feeling that feeling. It's almost like being in outer space, but I'm rooted to the earth. And this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a splendid isolation sort of feeling, I guess. But that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think that idea of feeling very small in a big space, I think that record to me was trying to capture that feeling when you're in a big landscape. And I think, again, moving to the country, moving to the forest, you feel that a lot. Whereas in this, I don't think I'd necessarily felt like that in the city. But yeah, suddenly feeling very small and insignificant, and
in a good way.
Yeah, in a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
And hopefully that track really captures that. We were also reading a lot of Mark Fisher at the time, and his book The Weird and the Eerie.
Yeah, great chapter.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Fantastic.
And he has a chapter on Brian Eno's On Land album.
Yeah, where he takes issue with me.
Does he?
He does. Yeah. Well, he didn't take issue with me. He doesn't agree on my interpretation of On Land.
Yeah.
Because he thinks it's autobiographical. No, I think it's autobiographical. And he thinks it's one of those. And I think God rest his soul, I think he thinks it's a kind of universal. This idea of using the literally, because that record's made with rocks and stones and stuff like that, makes it universal. But for me, my interpretation was that it's Brian's autobiographical record. It's ambience as autobiography, because he actually took those stones from places he played in as a kid, stuff like that. So anyway, side issue. But definitely that On Land was in my head. Land waves on land. They're not, of course, they're related on some level. Also, Patti Smith's Land. Don't you know that record?
No.
For some reason that I always put them together. Well, for some reason they've all got the word land in. That could be something.
I've also been very supported in my music making from Richie from the Infidels, who has been a real source of energy and inspiration to me to keep going. And he's just such a firecracker as a person. Anyone who'd ever seen the Infidels live, he's the hairy one going crazy at the back, headbutting a dustbin. that the end of Land Waves to me was a homage to Richie, who would always push me to go further, harder, higher, wider, deeper. And I think Land Waves was definitely Snow Palms finding a new gear.
Yeah, it definitely, that's the thing that Matt has brought to this whole project. I mean, I had a track on the last record, Origin and Echo, which was called Circling, which did have a kind of climactic ending section, which for me felt like I was really like pushing the boat out, but that was nothing compared to what Matt was envisaging. It could go higher, further, as he just said, higher, further, and that's great for me because that's like out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But it's also exhilarating, to do and to feel that it can be done and still belong to the same kind of sound world that everything had previously been in. I think that's quite an achievement, and that's what Matt has brought. We call him Dr. Rockets, as he brings this kind of like this energy thing. I mean, I think if left to my own devices, I'd be quite happy, making these increasingly kind of watercolor kind of music that maybe no one would even ever notice. So it's been great for me actually to strap on the jet skis, and go for it a bit on this record.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a bit of punk in there. You can just just a little.
I felt that when
energy.
we played live, actually, when we played especially when we played Land Waves live, I remember thinking, this is quite punk rock. And
I'm a massive Underworld fan, and my dad bought me Second Toughest in the Infants, and I'd not really encountered anything like it before. I was still in my mid-teens, I think, early teens, and he also he got me to deliver the Labour leaflets around the local village, and he'd bought me Second Toughest in the Infants, put it on a tape for me to listen to my Walkman, and I distinctly, some of those, the way music and your life can fuse together to create such a powerful memory. It's got such an incredible memory of hearing that record for the first time and posting Labour pamphlets through people's doors in Crayford, and just the way that Underworld layer music into this euphoric, transcendental plane. It's like the music just hovers there like a kind of cloud, and it just absolutely blew me away. I had no idea how it was made. I didn't know anything about sampling or anything, and I just wanted. I always seek for that height in music and love pieces that begin and end, like Steve Reich's 18 Musicians. It's just there all the time, and Land Waves, I think, has an element of my love of Underworld in it.
Cool. And so it's funny, kind of going back again just to my notes quickly, because between Land Wave and Thought Shadow, which is the next track, and I was going to let you go riff on that for a few minutes, but I wrote human movement, universality of movement from atom to rain to land to thought to flight, in terms of the process or the movement between Land Waves and Thought Shadow. So on that note, Thought Shadow.
We should have had you write out.
I love that. That's just totally made.
You totally nailed it there, I think, Paul. Thought Shadow was done. That was all done really fast. That was an improvisation, really fast. Unlike nearly everything else on the record, that was
it was one take. That was one take, wasn't it?
And it was. We'd been listening to Kathleen Aurelia Smith, a track on her record Ears, which is called Strata, I think. And it has this very kind of Eno discrete music quality to it, and it seems to kind of slow pulsation, but it's very beautiful, very sort of like something falling down in slow motion into a kind of beautiful pool or something. And so Matt had something on the modular which was like a sort of repeating pulse, I think. We just kind of used that as a click track almost, and which we did, which is not anything we ever used really. I think I just improvised. I think we improvised it together. I think we just played in the room.
Yeah, you played clarinet on a keyboard live, and I just got the modular, and I had this sequencer by Make Noise called the Rene. And what I quickly realised it can do brilliantly, and this is what so hooked me into Modular, was it does its thing, but you also can change everything in real time. And it's so easy to kind of tell it to skip bits and repeat little bits. So it's got these wonderful little electronic touch plates where you can kind of drop notes out and in. So there's this very repetitive pattern, but if you listen to it, it's got lots of quirks in it, because I'm, I think we're really bad at not touching things if we can. I remember going to the Science Museum as a kid and being utterly delighted at the amount of buttons and dials that you can interact with. If you basically stick someone in front of a sequencer with buttons and dials and go, press play and don't touch it, we're actually not capable. There will come a time when the finger will go in. Sounding like hanging out with my son as well. The finger will go in and you'll disrupt it. We can't resist it. So, and this is what drew me into Modular so much, and that was my first, I think, win from Modular, was that pattern on Thought Shadow and having David playing in real time, recording the MIDI, and playing this Rene live, and it sort of being half computer, half human, and that just track was one of the really easy ones. It was written in 4 minutes, as is done, and then we just hired the wonderful Christian Forshaw and Nick Moss to play winds, and they just replaced the MIDI parts live in the studio, and it was done. Great.
That's really cool. So I just wanted to touch a little bit, actually, and you kind of alluded to it there, on choices for instrumentation. So if you're saying that you're using these the modular workouts as a template,
yeah.
And so what's your process in terms of discovering what instrumentation is going to work, or kind of be layered on top of those templates?
Well, we banned strings, didn't we, David?
Yeah, we banned strings.
We said no strings, because strings always sound great. They're just great, You stick strings into electronic music and rock music and pop music, and they always sound so good and rich. So we thought, well, let's not go there. And I think it was just aesthetically driven through our ears. I think we're just hearing clarinets with the electronics.
I think it's also that thing. I remember when first making a record using a synthesizer, which is, I think, is it the SH-101? And the only sounds that I liked on it was when I really rounded everything off on the LFO or whatever it is. I can't remember how you do it now. And the more it sounded like a woodwind, like a clarinet basically, or a flute, the more I liked it. And that's the way. And he ended up using those sounds. And there's something about the woodiness of that, which the modular can do too. It's kind of woody, and I can't really explain it any more than that. When I hear that sound, it has an emotional effect on me, and it's which some other electronic sounds don't have. I mean, they have different effects on me. Kraftwerk were brilliant at using that, and I think it's because Florian Schneider was a flute player, and I think you can detect a lot of the tonality of when Kraftwerk have that absolutely kind of poignancy about the sound of the music. I think it's when the tonalities are approaching that area too. So for me, it was always that. It's that this is going to sit in this world. And also, if you look at the tradition of gamelan music, the way that mallets and flute or flute-like instruments, they kind of have always gone well together in that music. It also happens in a lot of African music where you have, the kind of balafons and some form of kind of pipes, or flute type music. So must be something human there. Somebody needs to write a PhD probably. But it feels like they're natural bedfellows, but that are still relatively unexplored. I mean, Philip Glass obviously used a lot of flute and repeating keyboards, and Steve Reich, most famously music for 18, has those pulsating clarinets, and they're part of our vocabulary too. But I think we try, whenever it sounded too much like that, we'd always nix it. We'd always say, no, that's too obvious. So we were more into it when it was either driving a piece, like on Everything Ascending, where you had this weird skipping time signature, which came from clarinet part, or as a sort of semi-ambient colouring, really, rather than purely sort of composed, because a lot of the time the wind players had a lot of trouble playing the things we'd written, because we don't have a clue what we're doing when we're writing the parts in terms of the technical parameters of playing wind instruments. But as a result, they're also coming out of their comfort zone, and they're arriving at interesting thing. When we say, well, can you just improvise these 4 bars? They'll do something that perhaps they wouldn't have done because they're in an uncomfortable place. And so, sorry, that's a very long explanation, but that's really the woodwind. It's not just a kind of, oh, that'll make a pretty decoration. Because if we'd gone that route, we could have just done, as Matt said, we could have just gone for a string quartet, which is just like, if you put a string quartet in a piece of music, it's like putting gold leaf on something. It's always going to look good, but it's probably quite meaningless. It's expensive but meaningless a lot of the time. That's my opinion. Some of the woods are less like that.
Thinking about it, the record is very made up of a lot of monophonic parts and instruments as well. I don't think we noticed this at the time, but a lot of the modular is notoriously difficult to make polyphonic and expensive. Voice monophonic, flutes, clarinets, woodwinds. So it's a lot of interweaving monophonic lines. I mean, there's a few moments when we just banged a filicorder on things because of its just sheer joy of filicorderness, the way it wheezes and wails over things. But mostly it's sort of monophonic lines built into clouds of harmony rather than actually polyphonic instruments. Oh, there's piano in there as well. We broke a lot of our own rules to be when we needed to.
Yeah, well, it's always the way.
Yeah,
you've got to break them when you need to.
If it's just not working.
Yeah. So, and just as before we get onto the last 2 tracks, just as a kind of as an extension to that, what about the recording process? Because it is a beautiful sounding record. It sounds stunningly gorgeous. So how did you go about recording? What's that process look like for you guys?
Well, it's really funny just to say that, because there's Matt can give you the full technical spec on everything. But one of the things we did is when we actually sampled a load of mallets at one point to use kind of to build up tracks. And in the end, I think we replayed everything. But when we sampled the tracks, we had a really buzzing guitar amplifier on in the studio, and we didn't notice
with its tremolator on as well. So it was like, so even worse. It was like going, but then when you pitch the samples, obviously the gets faster and slower. So it was like, and we'd gone through this whole laborious process of diligent sample making, but left on a bloody Vox amp in the background. So. But again, being lovers of Reich and It's Gonna Rain, and this is what sampling does so beautifully, is exposes these details to create their own artifacts and colour. So that kind of stayed.
So the bits of that are left in and I think this is interesting about the collage process of writing, creating, recording music is the texture, and this is what you don't get if you're recording out of the packet. In what I call like industrial door music, where great library of sounds, all the sounds are there and everything's beautiful. There's never any friction, there's nothing is ever rubbing against anything else to create some weird third thing. No sparks are ever flying off of that music. And I think our kind of approach is so kind of, it's meticulous 50% of the time and completely arse over elbow, the rest of the time. And both things have their value, and I think you have to have the yin and yang of those things.
I think David Grubbs calls it the brick dust of recording.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, we talk a lot about dust, and we have a lot of parts in the records called scree. When I went on the only holiday I've managed to go on with my wife Megan, we went to the Lake District, and the scree of the Lake District really seeped into my veins, and how the summit of Scawfell Pike is so British. It's like you get all the way up there and it's really, I had to say disappointing is wrong, but it's such a bizarre summit. Especially by the time we got up there, it was all misty, so there was loads of people on it. It's very moony. and barren and full of scree. And there's something so British about the summit of our highest peak.
We like our scree.
Yeah, so there's we talked a lot about scree in the record. The brick dust, I'm such fans of that. But the record, I also believe great productions are such a mixture of textures. And I always love those records with so many different like textures of brick dust. And I think, again, you know, Paul, this is maybe where we've reconvened sonically over all these years, is your record is so full of things that you can feel in it. And I think that's so overlooked. And back when probably all of us began music making, you didn't have DAWs, and things came with presets, but they were all the 80s synthesizers, and they were notoriously horrific sounding. So we learnt very quickly, avoid all presets for anything ever. Like, if you can erase them, get rid of the presets. And I feel so fortunate to have my first electronic instrument that I bought was an S950 sampler, which had a tone that was great for jungle bass lines and nothing else in it. So you had to make all of your own sounds. So that's a philosophy that stuck with me throughout my music making career. And I've always been notoriously skeptical of presets of all kinds. And the building up of the record was quite fascinating, and it did present some astronomical technical challenges. For example, multi-layered glockenspiels create these build-up of peak harmonic overtones, which then when you compress them in an electronic way actually would create frequencies that David would describe as his filling, rattling frequencies. It's like, well, I don't know what it is in there, but something's rattling my fillings. So some of the glockenspiels are incredibly laboured, where I'd have to create multi-sample round robins using random processes to trigger, so you get the same note randomly in 10 different strikes with very particular release decays, so as to reduce these harmonic build-ups. So it's this crackers mixture of very thrown together ad hoc brick dust improvisations, and some moments where a certain sound, as I've spent a month, the intro glockenspiel for Atom Dance was about a month long in the making to get it just so it had exactly the right decay and exactly the right amount of randomization and tone.
What's funny is that the instrument is the most sort of childlike and innocent, simple. It's the hardest thing to actually record, whereas everything, you know, some of the, like the modular just sounds great. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Whack it down. It's just like, it's just weird. It's weird. And yeah, the glockenspiel is not designed to be layered. That's for sure, because it will take your.
It's mostly used in. Springsteen uses quite a lot of glock, doesn't he? But a lot of the time it's just
doubling instrument.
Yeah, it's often just used as a sort of ding, a sort of strike to add a bit of sparkle. But to create quite a rock and roll record using glock as the main instrument, so it's fairly challenging.
I always loved "Dream Baby Dream" by Suicide, you know, which has that. That glock. So that was one of the that was in my mind when I first started using them. I don't know how Martin Rev did that, but the sound of that is still unequaled. I noticed it's on an advert.
Was it not recorded in Springsteen's studio as well to heighten the Glock link? I think so.
I don't know. Good 2 points. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. A bit of googling and then go on after this.
Cool. That's amazing. Thank you for that. Really, really interesting. And it does sound amazing. The record, really beautiful. So the last two tracks are Kojo Yakai.
Kojo Yaki, we call it.
Yaki. And White Cranes Fly, which am I right in thinking of some kind of Japanese link?
Kojo-yake is a Japanese term. Yeah, it's a term they use for a kind of weird tourist trend to go and nighttime visits to industrial factories and chemical plants which are lit up.
Wow.
So it's a really, really peculiar Japanese, kind of. I do. It's a trend. I read about it, and I just thought this is fascinating. And again, I thought it was totally us. This idea of the industrial and the human. And also the awesomeness of an industrial building turned into something very aesthetic. I thought that was just fascinating. I just thought, well, what would the music sound like that was that? I don't know whether we've done that or not, but that was kind of the process. And the music on that track, Kojo-yake, came from that was a very torturous process too. It started out being something completely different, but it had something in the structure that was, I think, again, it might even date right back to the Ableton improv sessions. But there was something about the structure which I liked. I couldn't put my finger on it, and Matt thought I was mad. So why are we pursuing this? Why are we pursuing it? And then I think there was another of those eureka moments where I can't remember what it was we put on it. Maybe it was the marimbas or something, and it suddenly kind of like made sense. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but it was something else, and it had this sort of. It does feel kind of weirdly Japanese, but it also sounds quite African. It just doesn't feel like it belongs to any kind of tradition.
We talked a lot about and read a lot of books that we read, Invisible Cities by Paulo Coelho, is it? And there was another book, I can't remember the name of it now, but we were really looking for imaginary spaces, sort of places that exist but don't exist. And I think this, probably of all the tracks, embodies that idea the most. And I remember reading one of these books, and it talked about this island off Australia on the map that had been there for years and years, and for some reason no one had bothered to actually check it was there. So fairly recently someone checked, and it's been made up all this time. And these, I think as humans, we really, I feel a sense of loss at that age of discovery of the world, and something really romantic about maps with bits not filled in. So
I really like that the Italo Calvino, the Invisible City, is this imagining places that are defined by things which we don't define places by in the real world. So he talks about one of the cities as where instead of air they have mud. Things like that. So it just kind of, it's completely bonkers, but it's a really great way of kind of redefining your attitude to what space is and what place is. And those were just great kind of ideas to think about in terms of abstract ideas when you're making music. Kojo-yake, similarly, it's in some ways it's a thing, it's a real thing, but it's a very abstract idea. Why are these people dressing up and having a date and going to look at a factory? Why are they doing that? It doesn't matter. They're putting themselves in a non-orthodox place to have a non-orthodox feeling, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we're trying to do with the music, trying to put you somewhere. And
it was another one of those compositions where Megan came in for her 10 minutes of vocals, and we, as inspiration, just said Meredith Monk. And that was where I think Megan showed her true colours. She started to relax a bit in the studio, and we suddenly heard her unbelievable ear for sonic harmony. And she did sort of 5 passes, and in her mind created these incredible sonic clouds of harmony. And I'd never seen that compositional brain at work, and I couldn't believe how complex she can hear harmony and texture, and she sort of did it. Yeah. It all sort of emerged in the end, and And it reminded us quite a bit of Harold Budd, I think. There was this part on the record that we called the Impressionists, which was those kind of glacial dings that the clouds of vocals come out of. So Megan pretty much wrote all of that stuff on the fly very, very quickly. And then all we did was we just abruptly cut a few bits to kind of create kind of blocks of silence in it, just suddenly like stop. So it kind of gives you this kind of feeling. And the labour was really rewarded when that extra layer came on. And then again, we both recognised that was the real emotional heart of the record. So the rest of it, I call it like the My Life in the Bush of Ghost stuff, then kind of formed the bed underneath those big sonic clouds of emotion.
It's interesting as well, that stop and start motion of those vocals is really industrial. Especially on that track. And it does have that kind of industrial chug about it in some ways, which is quite interesting with the factory stuff going on.
Well, I always think when those vocals come, it's almost like the lights have gone on. It's like the factory's lit up, and then they turn them off again or something. There's something going on there.
Brill, that's amazing. So, White Cranes Fly, the last track on the album.
Return.
White Cranes Return.
Oh,
White Cranes Fly, then White Cranes Return.
Sorry. We haven't written White Cranes Fly yet. We're doing it backwards.
It's a Record Store Day exclusive.
Yeah. Remixed by you, Paul.
You can have that one, Paul.
So, White Cranes Return.
Yeah, that was another improvisation, which was done pretty fast as well. That was also fast. Okay, it makes it sound like we should have done this record in about 2 weeks. The really long tracks took a really long time. The really short tracks took very little time at all. There was an improvisation with Matt playing piano and me playing the filicordia, the 60s organ. And I can't remember how it started. Was it another modular kind of pulsing? I think it was.
Yeah, I wanted. I'd read about inspiration behind Bon Iver's third album, and he said he wanted it to feel like someone had just discovered a cassette tape in a puddle. And I've not really listened to the record that much, but I love that idea of found cassettes. It's so intriguing, isn't it, when you find a cassette? You just really want to know what's on it. So I took that as inspiration and wanted to create that scrunchy cassette wobbly thing. So we had a lot of fun with that, and David played the diddly bow through the modular and with an e-bow and feedback just howling all over the place, and processing that through the modular system over the scrunchy drip-filled cassette. And again, it was another composition that was transformed by Megan's incredible vocal, what we called in the press release the vocal flights. And suddenly that turned a very linear composition into a really shaped composition where it all felt like it was building to this emotional climax. And that was mirrored in David's use of the chords on the filicorda, that we only really returned to the home chord once at the very end. So it's almost this feeling of being away for the whole record, and then the final chord of the album is home.
Yeah, we finally found the tonic. And but that's why it's called White Cranes Return. I love the idea of white crane. This idea of the symbolic of spring returning and kind of coming to rest, and it had that quality to it. And I think what we got Megan to do was to sort of double some of the parts that were there with them. And as soon as she did that, it gave it this poignancy. Before it was this kind of moody bit, and then it had this real human poignancy. But it also has this the kind of rhythm is it's like slow flapping, like wings. It's just weird. It's like you kind of think, how does this stuff get made?
So me and David ran around the studio.
We did
slowly flapping while Megan sang vocal flights.
That's it. White Cranes Return. And I think it sounds like the title of a great lost sort of Russian movie from the 1930s as well. So that's why I liked it. And that was it. And then we were done.
Super.
Just like that, easy peasy.
God, yeah. It does sound like you should have just knocked it out in a week, lads. I don't know what you've been playing at, honestly. Well, it's been a pleasure to have been invited to talk to you about it, and for such amazing insights. It is an absolutely stunning record, I have to say. Really, really beautiful. So, where can people get it? So, what's the links, and where do people pick it up from?
Well, it's out today. It's available on vinyl, CD, and all the other formats known to mankind and womankind. In all the usual places. We have a Bandcamp, Snow Palms Bandcamp. You can find that easy enough. Go to Village Green, our record label. It's on all the things you'd expect it to be on.
You can also stream it on Spotify as well if you're a lover of that platform, which of course we all are. And Bleep, I think it's in rough trade.
So what's next for you guys? I know you like the album's just dropped, but what is it? Is the work in progress? Are you thinking about what's the next bit? Or
there are some tracks that are underway. Yeah, what they're going to be and how they're eventually going to come out. I mean, we don't really know yet, but we've got kind of an idea.
We started album 4, which has been great fun. Working with Christian Forshaw a lot. He's been involved with, I think, a live interpretation of Eno's Ambient 1. Did you do that? And he's also done a lot of Michael Nyman stuff.
He played with Michael Nyman. He played with Moondog.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're working quite a lot with Christian on some compositions for album 4, which is really exciting. Megan has, become quite an integral composer in the band as well, which is quite interesting. And we did a performance at the South Bank Centre, our first ever gig and last gig, it seems. And we were all set to get Snow Palms live, really rocking. And COVID has shut that down a little bit. So I've got some ideas to propose to David about some kind of modern... I quite like the idea of people giving us inspirations on the web, saying, oh, how about this? And then us doing some live improvisations, on Twitch or something like that. So yeah, we've basically got lots of ideas going forwards, but yeah, a lot of energy.
We can't get in the same room at the moment, obviously, so that's a bit of a drawback.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon that'll change.
Yeah, let's hope so. Absolutely. Well, I'll let you sign off, Matt, seeing it's your podcast, isn't it? So,
well, Paul, thank you so much. I can't think of anyone else in the whole entire world that I would have rather have done this, and you've just done such a marvellous job. And I'm going to go back through the podcast and extract some of those wonderful things you said, because I really want them. When you put little quotes on your Bandcamp, that was just the greatest thing, and actually making the record worth it, hearing someone verbalise it in that way. So thank you for taking the time to interview us on the podcast. Thank you for having a takeover, and enjoy the rest of your day, Paul. And for you, we are pumped for your new record, so hopefully find the inspiration for that.
Don't forget to go out and find a really expensive version of this on eBay or something.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, guys.
Big shout out to Matt Littler as well for the incredible artwork.
Yeah, amazing.
Big up Matt Littler every time. Yeah.
Cheers, Dan.
All right, all the best now. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Bye. Yeah. So there you have it. The release of the record. It's now out into the world. We are absolutely thrilled. We've had some live offers, so we can't wait to get the Snow Palms machine rolling. So thank you again for listening. I hope you really loved it. We've got a new episode currently being edited with Angèle David Guillou, and that is talking all about the release of her incredible new record. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay sane, stay creative. And we'll see you all again soon. Bye.